He was a man who had everything: a high-powered job, a glamorous fiancée, and a deep-seated contempt for the woman he'd left behind. She was his ex-wife, the simple woman he'd divorced for lacking ambition. When he heard she was back in town, he saw a chance for the ultimate humiliation. He invited her to his company's exclusive gala, a black-tie event for the city's elite, planning to parade his success in her face. But there was one detail he never knew, one secret she had kept for 2 years. She wasn't just a guest. She was the owner of the entire company, and he had just invited his boss to her own party, planning to mock her in front of her entire board. Sawyer Roth adjusted the knot of his silk tie, his reflection staring back at him from the floor-to-ceiling glass of his corner office. 22 floors above the Chicago River, he felt like a king. As the senior vice president of business development at Apex Designs, the city's most prestigious architectural firm, Sawyer wasn't just successful, he was a symbol of it. His life was a curated masterpiece: the minimalist, steel and glass apartment, the gleaming German sports car, and his fiancée Bianca Slade, a woman whose beauty was matched only by her family's social standing. He was in the final stages of planning the firm's 50th anniversary gala. This wasn't just a party. It was his coronation. For 2 years, Apex had been run by a transition team representing the estate of the reclusive founder, J.M. Price. The mysterious new owner, known only by those initials, had never been seen. Sawyer, who had single-handedly landed the, supposedly, $200 million Crescendo residential tower project, was certain. The owner's first public appearance at the gala would be to announce him as the new CEO. He was scrolling through the catering proofs when his office phone buzzed. It was his colleague, Philip. "Hey, Sawyer, quick question about the seating," Philip said. "But first, you'll never guess who I ran into at lunch. Remember your ex-wife, Jeanette?" Sawyer's grip tightened on his mouse. Jeanette. The name tasted like ash. He hadn't seen her in 3 years, not since the divorce. She was his one, nagging failure. He had discovered her working as a waitress in a small diner while he was a junior architect. He'd been captivated by her quiet intelligence, but as his star rose, her simplicity became an anchor. She was studying business at night, but he saw no fire in her. "I need a queen, Jane, not a server," he had told her the day he packed his bags. "I'm building an empire, and you're still stuck. You have no ambition." "Jeanette, what about her?" Sawyer said, feigning disinterest. "She's back in town. I saw her at the Bristol. Looked the same. Simple. I think she's working some admin job over at a logistics firm. Said she was just getting resettled." A slow, cruel smile spread across Sawyer's face. "An admin job. Perfect. Is that so?" he murmured. "That's interesting." After he hung up, the seed of an idea began to sprout, nasty and thrilling. He could just ignore her. Or he could perform a public service. He could show her, in one glittering, overwhelming night, exactly what she had given up. He could show her the empire he'd built, the queen he'd found, and the pathetic, small life she was destined for. It wasn't just about success. It was about proving he was right. He brought it up to Bianca, that evening in their penthouse. Bianca, filing her nails on a white suede chaise, loved the idea. "Oh, darling, that's vicious. I love it," she purred, the diamonds on her engagement ring catching the light. "A little charity case for the gala. We can introduce her to the board chairman. It'll be adorable watching her try to curtsy." "It's an educational opportunity," Sawyer said, pouring 2 glasses of scotch. "It will give her closure." He found her email address through a mutual acquaintance. He spent a full 10 minutes crafting the message, his fingers flying across the keyboard, his heart pounding with a smug, vindictive thrill. Subject: An opportunity for you, Jeanette. I heard from Philip that you've returned to Chicago. I trust you're finding your footing. As you may, or may not know, I am organizing the Apex Designs 50th Anniversary Gala at the Fairmont. It's a rather exclusive event, but in the interest of old times, I've managed to secure you a +1, despite the exclusive list. I think it would be illuminating for you to see how the other half lives. It might provide you with some much-needed perspective, or at least a good meal. Let my assistant know if you can make it. I'm sure you don't have many black tie dresses hanging in your closet, so don't feel pressured to buy something new. Just try to look presentable. All the best. Sawyer Roth, SVP, Apex Designs. He hit send, imagining her face. The embarrassment, the shame, the bitter realization of her mistake. 20 miles away, in a sleek, soundproof office overlooking Lake Michigan, a notification chimed. Jeanette Price looked up from a complex financial projection. Her office was the opposite of Sawyer's. Warm woods, soft lighting, walls lined with books, not trophies. She read the email. Once, twice. A small, cold smile touched her lips. She thought of the empire she hadn't just inherited, but had spent 2 years secretly rebuilding. She thought of the audits, the restructuring, and the stack of files on her desk, one of which had Sawyer's name on it, flagged in red. Her executive assistant, a sharp, older man named Martin, entered with a stack of letters. More RSVPs for the gala, Ms. Price, and the final draft of your speech. Thank you, Martin, she said, not looking up from her screen. And Martin, I'll be needing that +1. Mom? She clicked. Reply. Sawyer is overdue for his performance review. I think a black tie setting is perfectly appropriate. She typed one word and hit send. Delighted. The divorce had been brutal, not in its legality, but in its emotional violence. Sawyer hadn't just left. He had dissected her, piece by piece, until she felt worthless. No ambition was his kindest criticism. Provincial, frightened, and permanently small were his favorites. He told her he was destined for greatness, and she was the ballast he was cutting loose. She had signed the papers in a daze, crushed by the man she had supported, loved, and put through his final certifications while she worked double shifts at the diner and attended night school. She had cried for a week. Then she got angry. Then she got focused. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, the call came. Jeanette's maternal grandfather, J.M. Price, had passed away. She barely knew the man. He was a reclusive, almost mythical figure her mother had been estranged from. Jeanette had met him once, at her mother's funeral. He was a quiet, imposing man who had looked at her with a piercing, analytical gaze. She was summoned to a law office in downtown Chicago. The lawyer, Mr. Coleman, who she would later learn was the chairman of the board, explained the situation in disbelief. J.M. Price, a man who had built a multi-billion-dollar holding company, had left everything to her. Not his distant sons, not a charity, but his only granddaughter. The holding company, Price Equities, owned dozens of properties, several tech startups, and one passion project he'd founded in his youth, Apex Designs. Jeanette was staggered. She was 28 years old and had just inherited an empire. But the inheritance came with a caveat, a handwritten letter from the old man himself. Jeanette, your mother was soft. I was hard. You, I see, are steel. But steel needs to be forged. The companies are yours, but they are full of vipers. Apex, my first love, is the worst of them. They are arrogant and fat. Do not let them see you. Do not let them know you. They will eat you alive. Be a ghost. Watch, learn, And when you are ready, strike. Trust Martin. He served me. He will serve you." She took his advice. For the first 6 months, she did nothing but listen. Martin, her grandfather's long-time confidant and now her executive assistant, became her guide. He was the only person in the world who knew her identity. To the board of Apex, the new owner was J.M. Price, a faceless entity communicating through the lawyers of the estate. Jeanette, meanwhile, got an admin job at one of her own logistics firms, using her mother's maiden name. She sat in a cubicle. She listened to the break-room gossip. She learned the business from the ground up, just as her grandfather had. After a year, she began to manage from the shadows. She moved into her real office, a private floor in a building Price Equities owned, under a shell corporation. She, as J.M. Price, began to issue directives. She demanded audits. She cut fat. She restructured departments. And she watched Sawyer Roth. She saw him rise, promoted by the very vipers her grandfather warned her about. He was all flash. His projects looked incredible on paper, but the audits she requested showed a different story. Thin margins, unhappy clients, and a $200 million contract for the Crescendo Tower that was, to put it mildly, built on a foundation of lies. Sawyer was promising features the firm couldn't deliver on a timeline they couldn't meet. The client, a massive private equity group, was getting nervous. Jane had been preparing to intervene for months. The 50th anniversary gala was her idea. It was to be her introduction. The ghost was finally going to appear, clean house, and set the new standard for her company. Sawyer's invitation wasn't just an insult, it was a cosmic joke. He was a condemned man, blissfully unaware, inviting the executioner to the gallows and offering to buy her a drink. "Are you entirely sure you want to proceed this way, Miss Price?" Martin asked, adjusting his glasses. He was deeply loyal and protective. This is a circus. He's a buffoon. You don't need to subject yourself to this." Jeanette looked at the invitation again. "Presentable." Her lip curled. "Oh, absolutely," she said, her voice dropping, the steel her grandfather had seen finally forged. "Sawyer is the poster child for everything wrong with this company. He's the embodiment of arrogance. The board needs to see what happens when that arrogance is given a platform." She stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city. Her city. "He wants me to see his empire, Martin. He has no idea he's been living in mine." The week leading up to the gala was pure adrenaline for Sawyer. He was a whirlwind of motion, confirming vendors, barking orders at his assistants, and practicing his spontaneous acceptance speech for the CEO position. He was so certain of his promotion that he'd already commissioned a custom plaque for his new office. "It's about presents, Bianca," he explained, striding around their apartment while she scrolled through Instagram. "The board, Coleman, all of them. They respect strength. They saw how I handled the Crescendo deal. I willed it into existence." "Of course you did, darling," Bianca said, barely looking up. "Now which dress? The red or the redder?" Bianca was just as invested in this as he was. Her entire identity was performance. She relished the idea of being a CEO's wife, but even more, she relished the drama of Jeanette's arrival. "She actually said yes?" Bianca marveled, sitting up. "The little mouse has courage, I'll give her that." "It's not courage, it's desperation," Sawyer sneered. "She wants one last look at the life she could have had. She'll be in the corner, nursing a flat ginger ale, watching me on stage. It's almost sad." His cruelty, however, needed an audience. He found his colleague, Philip, by the elevators. Philip was a competent, if unexciting, architect. Sawyer saw him as a rival, but a non-threatening one. "Philip, my man, Ready for the big night?" Sawyer slapped him on the back. "It'll be a night," Philip said, non-committal. Still a lot of whispers about who this J.M. Price is. "I heard they're ruthless. The entire third floor was restructured by email." "Ruthless is just another word for efficient," Sawyer boasted. "You can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs, Phil." The old guard was weak. This new owner, they know talent. They see what I've done with Crescendo. They're not going to let a rainmaker like me sit in a VP chair for long. "I suppose not," Philip said, shifting his briefcase. He, unlike Sawyer, had actually read the internal risk report on the Crescendo project and was deeply worried. Sawyer, high on his own hubris, decided to go one step further. He stopped at a high-end jewelry store on his way home. Not for Bianca, for Jane. He told the saleswoman he needed something for a charity auction, something simple, for someone who doesn't get out much. He settled on a thin, silver-plated bracelet with a single, tiny zirconia. It cost $80. He had it gift-wrapped. He would give it to Jane at the gala, perhaps right after his speech. A little no-hard-feelings trinket, a souvenir from the life she'd never touch. Across town, Jeanette's preparations were of a different nature. She was not planning an outfit. She was planning a war. Her admin job was long forgotten. She was in the main boardroom of Price Equities, flanked by Martin and Mr. Coleman, the chairman of the Apex board. Coleman, a stern man in his 60s, had been skeptical of Jeanette at first. Now he was her most fervent convert. He had seen her turn a dozen failing assets into profitable ventures. "The audit is complete, Ms. Price," Coleman said, sliding a thick binder across the table. "It's exactly as you suspected. Sawyer Roth is a house of cards." Jeanette opened the binder. The numbers were damning. The $200 million Crescendo contract was not secured. The client, a private equity group called North Star Holdings, was not just nervous, they were actively threatening litigation. Sawyer had hidden the default notices. He had fabricated progress reports. He had, in essence, been lying to the board for 6 months to secure his promotion. "He's been inflating his expenses," Jeanette noted, her finger tracing a line item. "A $5,000 dinner at a Linnea? For client relations?" "A Linnea," Martin specified, "is where his fiancée, Bianca Slade, had her birthday party." "He's not just arrogant, he's a thief," Jeanette said, her voice quiet and deadly. "And the board?" "They are embarrassed," Coleman admitted. "They believed his charm. They wanted to. He was the perfect image. But they are behind you. His fraud voids his contract. His termination will be effective when you decide." "I've decided," Jeanette said, closing the binder. "It will be effective the moment I walk off that stage." "And the gala? The invitation?" Coleman asked, his brow furrowing. "It's a security risk. It's undignified." "It's necessary," Jeanette said. "He wants to make a spectacle of me. He's right. It will be a spectacle. But he's miscast the roles. He thinks he's the star of the show. He's just the before picture." Only then did she turn to her personal preparations. She wasn't having a dress made. She already had her armor. In her private closet was a custom-made outfit. It wasn't a glittering gown. It was a midnight blue silk wool creation that was half suit, half dress. It had sharp, defined shoulders, a severe but elegant neckline, and a cut that was pure, unadulterated power. It was not the dress of a guest. It was the dress of an owner. "He told me to look presentable, Martin," she said, looking at the outfit. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to disappoint him." The grand ballroom at the Fairmont Chicago was a sea of black ties, diamonds, and noise. Champagne flowed from gravity-defying towers. A string quartet played softly in the corner, ignored by the laughing, shouting members of Chicago's financial and architectural elite. Sawyer Roth stood near the grand staircase, his arm possessively around Bianca's waist. Bianca was a vision in blood red, a dress so bright and tight it demanded attention. Sawyer felt a surge of pride. This was his life. These were his people. "There's Coleman," Sawyer muttered, nodding toward the bar. "He looks nervous." "Good. He's probably just anxious about the big announcement." "Stop fidgeting, darling. You're creasing your lapel," Bianca hissed, before turning a dazzling smile on a passing bank president. Philip found them, looking pale. "Sawyer, I just got a text from the North Star client rep. He says he's here. He sounds furious. He said something about fraud?" Sawyer's smile tightened. He grabbed Philip by the elbow, steering him behind a pillar. "You will not breathe a word of this, do you understand? They're just nervous. I'll handle it after my announcement. The rep is probably just trying to squeeze us. Don't ruin this for me." Philip recoiled, nodding silently. Sawyer straightened his tie and returned to Bianca's side, his mask of triumph firmly back in place. "Where is she?" he whispered, scanning the crowd. "It's 8:30. Maybe the little mouse lost her nerve." "Or she couldn't get a cab," Bianca tittered. And then he saw her. Jeanette wasn't announced. She didn't arrive. She simply appeared. She had walked in from a private entrance, bypassed the check-in line, and was now standing by the main doors, speaking quietly with Mr. Coleman, the chairman of the board. Sawyer's first reaction was disappointment. He had braced himself for a pathetic sight, a cheap polyester dress from a department store, frizzy hair, a look of wide-eyed terror. Jane was none of those things. The midnight blue outfit she wore was confusing. It wasn't a ball gown. It was simple, stark, and tailored so perfectly it must have cost a fortune. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She wore no jewelry save for a pair of simple diamond studs. She looked formidable. She wasn't looking at the crowd with awe. She was scanning it, her expression analytical. And she was talking to Coleman. Coleman, who was listening to her with a look of intense, deferential respect. What is she doing talking to Coleman?" Sawyer stammered. "He probably pities her," Bianca scoffed, though a line of uncertainty had appeared on her brow. "Look at that dress. It's a suit. She looks like she's here to do someone's taxes." Sawyer, needing to reassert control, grabbed Bianca's hand and strode toward them. This was not how this was supposed to go. He needed to put her back in her box. "Jane!" he boomed, feigning delighted surprise. He put himself physically between her and Coleman. "You made it, and Mr. Coleman, you've met my ex-wife, Jeanette." Coleman looked at Sawyer as if he were something he'd scraped off his shoe. "Mr. Roth," he said, his voice ice. Jane, however, smiled. It was a tiny, polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hello, Sawyer. Bianca. What a lovely dress." "Thank you," Bianca said, looking Jane up and down. "And you? How resourceful. Did you make it yourself? It's very functional." "It serves its purpose," Jane said evenly. "Well, I'm so glad you came," Sawyer continued, his smugness returning. "He was the VP. She was nobody. Coleman was just being polite. I was worried you'd be intimidated. The ballroom is spectacular, isn't it? This whole event, you know. This was my vision." "It's certainly a vision," Jane said, her eyes sweeping the room. "You spared no expense." "Exactly," Sawyer laughed. "Speaking of which," he pulled her aside, away from Coleman and Bianca. Listen, Jane, I know this must be a lot for you. Seeing all this. Seeing me. I just want you to know. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, gift-wrapped box. I got you something. A little party favor. Just to show there are no hard feelings for how things tapered off for you. He pressed the cheap box into her hand. Jeanette looked at the box. Then she looked at him. For a second, Sawyer felt a chill. Her gaze was not the cowed, heartbroken look he remembered. It was the gaze of a biologist studying an insect. "Sawyer," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "you have no idea what you've just done." Before he could respond, the lights in the ballroom dimmed. Mr. Coleman had left them and was walking toward the stage. A single spotlight followed him. "This is it," Sawyer whispered, his chest puffing out. He grabbed Bianca's hand. He completely forgot about Jane, who simply let the cheap bracelet fall from her hand, disappearing under a curtain. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, if I may have your attention," Mr. Coleman's voice boomed. Sawyer straightened his tie. He was ready for his new life. "Welcome," Mr. Coleman began, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "Welcome to the 50th anniversary of Apex Designs. For half a century, this firm has shaped the skyline of our great city." Sawyer stood near the stage, perfectly positioned. He'd given Bianca a little squeeze. "Get your camera ready," he whispered. "Tonight," Coleman continued, "is not just about honoring our past. It is about launching our future. As many of you know, for the past 2 years, Apex has been under the stewardship of a new, visionary owner who has, until now, chosen to remain private while they restructured this great company from the inside out." Sawyer nodded sagely, as if he were in on it. He saw Philip in the crowd, looking green. He saw the rep from North Star Holdings, standing near the back, looking like thunder. Sawyer ignored them. This was his moment. This new leader has been known to us only by their initials, J.M. Price, an individual who has valued substance over spectacle, integrity over image. "He's talking about me," Sawyer whispered to Bianca, his excitement palpable. "He's using the J.M. Price name as a proxy, but he's describing me, my work, my substance." Bianca was vibrating, her smile locked in place. "It has been my distinct honor," Coleman said, "to work with this individual, to see their sharp, incisive mind and their deep commitment to the real values of this company. Tonight, our owner has decided it is time to step out of the shadows and take their rightful place." Sawyer actually took one step toward the stairs, preparing to ascend. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the sole proprietor, the new global CEO, and the visionary future of Apex Designs, Ms. Jeanette Marie Price." The words dropped into the room like a bomb. Silence. 1,000 eyes scanned the crowd, confused. Sawyer froze. His smile cracked, then dissolved. He looked at Bianca. Her face was a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. What did he say?" Sawyer stammered. "What name was that?" A single, brilliant white spotlight shot from the back of the room, cutting through the darkness. It didn't land on the stairs. It landed directly on the woman Sawyer had just tried to hand a $80 bracelet. Jeanette. She stood perfectly still as the giant screens on either side of the stage, which had shown the Apex 50 logo, flickered to life. They now showed a professional, powerful headshot of her. Underneath it, the words, "Jeanette M. Price, CEO and owner, Apex Designs." Sawyer stopped breathing. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, pale grey. He looked at her. Her calm, cold gaze met his. "J. M. Price," Bianca whispered, her voice a strangled gasp. "Jeanette Marie Price." Jane gave her ex-husband a small, tight-lipped nod. It was a nod of dismissal. Then, to the sound of stunned, hesitant applause that slowly grew, she walked past him, her heels clicking purposefully on the floor. She ascended the steps, not as a guest, but as a queen ascending her throne. She shook Coleman's hand and turned to the podium. The jumbotron showed her face, 20 feet high. She was in command. Sawyer just stood there, a statue of broken ego. His entire world, his future, his empire. It had all just collapsed in on him in the span of 10 seconds. He said to no one. She was a waitress. "She's not a waitress, you idiot," Bianca hissed, her voice shaking with rage and terror. She's, oh my God. Sawyer, what did you do?" I invited her. "You invited her to humiliate her," Bianca shrieked, her voice cracking. "You invited your boss, the owner of the company, to her own party. To pity her?" Bianca looked at him, her eyes wide with dawning horror. Not for him, but for herself. Her future as a CEO's wife just evaporated. She was, instead, the fiancée of the company's biggest fool. "You're an idiot," she spat, her face contorted in a mask of pure contempt. "A complete and utter idiot." She turned and stalked away, pushing through the stunned crowd, leaving him utterly alone in the spotlight's afterglow. "It has been my distinct honor," Mr. Coleman said, his voice resonating with a gravity that hushed the final whispers in the ballroom, "to work with this individual, to see their sharp, incisive mind, and their deep commitment to the real values of this company. Tonight, our owner has decided it is time to step out of the shadows and take their rightful place." Sawyer's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt the heat of 1,000 gazes. This was it. He smoothed his lapel, his breath held, his eyes locked on the stairs. He could already feel the heavy weight of the CEO title settling on his shoulders. He gave Bianca's hand a final, triumphant squeeze. "Ladies and gentlemen," Coleman boomed, "please welcome to the stage the sole proprietor, the new global CEO, and the visionary future of Apex Designs." Sawyer took one step forward. "Ms. Jeanette Marie Price." The name hung in the air, a physical, impossible thing. Sawyer's brain simply refused to compute it. He froze, his foot hovering over the floor. He heard a sound like 1,000 people sucking in their breath at once. Jeanette. He thought he had misheard. It had to be a mistake. A different Jeanette. A Jeanette Price, who was some distant, unknown cousin of the founder. It was a coincidence. It had to be. Then, the brilliant white spotlight didn't hit the stairs. It shot across the room, a searing beam that landed directly on the woman standing 10 feet away from him, the woman in the midnight blue suit, the woman he had called simple, the woman he had just tried to give an $80 a bracelet, Jeanette. As if in a nightmare, the two giant screens on either side of the stage, which had shown the Apex 50 logo, flickered to life. They were now filled with a professional, powerful headshot of her. It was a photo he'd never seen. Her gaze was direct, intelligent, and utterly ruthless. Underneath it, in stark white letters, were the words, "Jeanette M. Price, CEO and owner, Apex Designs." Sawyer stopped breathing. The blood didn't just drain from his face. It felt as if it had been violently vacuumed from his entire body. The noise of the ballroom compressed into a high-pitched, deafening whine. He looked at her. Her calm, cold gaze met his across the small distance. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply held his gaze. And in that look, he saw the full, terrifying depth of his miscalculation. "J.M. Price," Bianca whispered, her voice a strangled gasp. Her perfectly manicured fingers were digging into his arm, her nails breaking the skin. Jeanette. Marie. Price? Sawyer couldn't speak. He just made a small, choking sound. Bianca tore her eyes from the jumbotron and looked at him. Her face was not confused. It was not shocked. It was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Not for Jeanette. For him. You, she hissed, her voice shaking with a venom he had never heard. You idiot! Bianca! Wait! It's a mistake! He stammered, his mind reeling, trying to find a narrative that made sense. A mistake? She spat. She looked from him to the woman on the screen and back to him. The dawning horror on her face was not for his plight, but for her own. Her future as a CEO's wife, the penthouse, the social dominance, it all evaporated in a single, humiliating puff of smoke. She wasn't engaged to the king. She was engaged to the court jester. You invited her to humiliate her, Bianca shrieked, her voice cracking, drawing the stares of those closest to them. You invited your boss, the owner of the entire company, to her own party, to pity her. I didn't know, he pleaded. That's what makes you an idiot, Sawyer, she cried. A complete and utter fool. She ripped her arm from his grasp. You are nothing. With a final look of contempt that burned him to his very soul. She turned and stalked away, her red dress a slash of crimson as she pushed through the stunned, whispering crowd. She didn't look back. She left him utterly alone, a solitary, trembling target in the middle of the room. A stunned, hesitant applause began, led by the board members at the front tables. It slowly grew, a wave of confusion and dawning realization. Jeanette, impassive, walked past him. Her heels clicked on the marble floor, each sound a hammer blow against his sanity. She ascended the steps, not as a guest, not as an ex-wife, but as a queen ascending her throne. She shook Coleman's hand and turned to the podium. She adjusted the microphone, and the small sound echoed like a gunshot. Good evening, she said. Her voice was calm, clear, and amplified, filling every corner of the vast room. It was not the quiet, hesitant voice he remembered from the diner. This voice had iron in it. This voice had authority. My name is Jeanette Price, and as of tonight, I am the CEO of Apex Designs. For 2 years, I have been your silent partner. Her eyes scanned the room, seeming to land on every single face. I have been observing. Sawyer was paralyzed. He watched, horrified, as Philip, his colleague, slowly turned to look at him, his expression one of pure, unadulterated shock, mixed with a dawning, terrible understanding. I have observed a company with a brilliant legacy, Jane continued, a company my grandfather built with his bare hands. But I also observed a company that had begun to value image over integrity, a company that rewarded arrogance over results, a company that, in its comfort, had begun to rot from the inside. Every word was a physical blow. Sawyer could feel sweat on his palms, the bile rising in his throat. He was the rot. He was the arrogance. That era, she declared, her voice ringing with finality, is over. Effective immediately, Apex Designs is entering a new chapter, one of performance, transparency, and accountability. She smiled, a sharp, corporate smile that held no warmth. We will no longer tolerate bloat. We will no longer tolerate waste. And we will certainly no longer tolerate those who believe they are bigger than the company itself. The applause this time was thunderous. The board members, the real power players, were all standing, applauding her. His boss, his ex-wife. I know, she said, raising a hand to quiet them, that there are many rumors about our major projects. Let me be clear. Sawyer's heart stopped. No, she wouldn't. "The Crescendo Tower project," she said, her voice cutting, "is being terminated. We will not do business with partners we have misled. We will absorb the loss. We will apologize to our partners at North Star Holdings, who I see are here tonight, and we will rebuild that relationship based on truth." Across the room, the North Star rep, who had looked murderous, now looked intrigued. He stared at Jeanette, then nodded slowly at the stage. He saw a path forward. Sawyer saw a sheer cliff. "My first act as CEO," Jane said, "will be a full, top-to-bottom audit of every department. We will find the rot, and we will cut it out, starting tomorrow morning." Her eyes swept the crowd and landed, once more, on him. "Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your evening." She walked off the stage, not to a storm of congratulations. People were too stunned for that, but to a path clearing for her as if she were royalty. Sawyer couldn't move. He was trapped. People were staring at him. Not just staring. They were whispering, pointing. He saw the glint of phones being raised, recording his humiliation. He was the rot. He was the arrogance. He was the man who had just been, in the most public and surgical way possible, executed. And then she was in front of him. Jeanette, flanked by Mr. Coleman and her assistant, Martin, who now held a slim leather portfolio. The whispers around them died. This was the main event. "Sawyer," she said. Her voice was quiet again, just for him. He couldn't speak. He just made a sound, a dry, choking gasp. "Jane, I had no idea." "That's the problem," she said, her eyes flat and cold. "You never did. You never had any idea. You looked at me, and you saw a charity case, a failure. You saw someone you could pity. No, Jane, please," he begged, his voice breaking. This couldn't be real. It was a joke, a prank. "Jane, we can fix this." His mind, in its desperation, grasped for the only narrative it knew, his own importance. "The Crescendo project. I can fix it. We can run this company. Together. Like we used to talk about. You and me. The vision. It was our vision." He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the expensive silk wool. "I can help you. You need me." The desperation in his voice was foul. Jeanette looked at his hand on her arm with such profound, withering disgust that he snatched it back as if he'd been burned. She laughed. It was not a sound he had ever heard from her. It was short, sharp, and utterly devoid of humor. "There is no we, Sawyer," she said. "There is me, the owner of this company, and there is you, a liability." What? "You told me I had no ambition," she said, shaking her head slowly. "No, Sawyer. You had no vision. You couldn't see past your own reflection. You couldn't see the woman who was paying your bills, getting her business degree at night, and planning an empire while you were practicing your signature." "Jane, please," he whispered, his body shaking. "Your arrogance," she said, her voice shifting, the CEO returning, "was not just an insult, it was a crime. You haven't just been arrogant. You've been committing fraud." She nodded at Martin. Martin, silent until now, stepped forward and opened the portfolio. He didn't turn it for Sawyer to see. He read from it, his voice clear and emotionless, a corporate executioner. "Sawyer Roth, on August 14th, you buried a default notice from North Star Holdings. On September 2nd, you filed a fraudulent progress report to the board, claiming 40% completion on a project that had not broken ground. On September 20th, 22nd, and October 4th, you expensed $12,400 in client dinners that were, in fact, personal expenses, including at Alinea for Miss Bianca Slade's birthday, and at the aviary. No, no, Sawyer babbled, looking around wildly. That was client relations. That was business. It was theft, Jeanette stated, her voice like ice. You're not a king, Sawyer. You're not a rainmaker. You're a con man. And your con just ran out. She looked past him, at the two uniformed security guards who had quietly appeared at the ballroom's side exit. Mr. Roth, she said, her voice now formal, void of all personal history. Your employment at Apex Designs is terminated, effective immediately. Your building access has been revoked. Your corporate accounts are frozen. Martin will supervise you as you collect your personal effects from your office. You have 10 minutes. After that, you will be escorted from the premises. The finality of it hit him. The job, the money, the life. It was all gone. No, he said, the word a desperate gasp. No, no, Jane, please. He did the one thing he had left. The one pathetic, final act of a broken man. He fell to his knees. The entire ballroom, 1,000 guests, watched as the man who was supposed to be the next CEO collapsed at his ex-wife's feet. I love you, he cried, the sound a ragged wail. Tears and snot streamed down his face. I still love you. I made a mistake. I was an idiot. I see that now. Don't do this. Please. Jane looked down at the pathetic, broken man kneeling in the center of her ballroom, his hands clasped in supplication. The man who had called her small, the man who had tried to break her. There was no anger left. There was no hatred. There was no pity. There was just nothing. You weren't an idiot because you left me, she said, her voice quiet but carrying in the dead silence. You were an idiot because you thought I was worthless. But I was never worthless. She held his gaze for one last second. You just can't recognize value. She turned, her back straight, and walked away. Coleman and Martin on her flanks, she moved through the crowd, which parted for her like the sea. She didn't look back. Sawyer Roth was left alone on his knees, his sobs echoing in the vast, silent room, a spectacle of his own making. The silence that fell over the grand ballroom as Jeanette walked away was heavier than any sound. The music did not swell to cover the moment. The string quartet had simply stopped playing, their bows frozen, their eyes wide. Sawyer was still on his knees, a fixed, grotesque statue of humiliation. The spotlight had moved off him, but he was still the center of every stare, a black hole of disgrace. He heard a single, sharp sound, a laugh. He looked up. It was Bianca. She was standing 20 feet away, a glass of champagne in her hand. She was looking at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. She wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. She was amused. She had already processed her loss and was now simply marveling at his stupidity. Well, she said, loud enough for those around her to hear. He's certainly not CEO material, is he? She turned, not in a flurry, but with a deliberate, cold grace, and walked over to a man by the bar, a man Sawyer recognized as a rival, a hedge fund manager he had always despised. Bianca tapped the man on the shoulder, and when he turned, she gave him a dazzling, predatory smile. She was already cutting her losses, her future secured before Sawyer's knees had even cracked the floor. That was the last he ever saw of her. The next he heard was the 48-hour later announcement in the society pages, severing their engagement and, in a single, brutal sentence, aligning herself with integrity and honesty. Sir. Sawyer flinched. The two security guards Jeanette had summoned were now standing over him. They were not unkind, but their expressions were firm, their hands resting on their belts. "You need to come with us, sir." The word "sir" was a mockery. One guard took his arm, hauling him to his feet. He was a dead weight. The walk from the center of the ballroom to the side exit was the longest of his life. It was a gauntlet of whispers, of averted eyes, and, worst of all, of pity. The pity he had been so eager to heap on Jeanette was now drowning him. Martin, Jeanette's quiet, severe assistant, was waiting at the door. He didn't speak. He simply led the way up a service elevator into Sawyer's former office. His security pass was already deactivated. His nameplate was already gone. In 10 minutes, he was back in the service elevator, clutching a small cardboard box containing a framed photo, a coffee mug, and a meaningless top salesman trophy. He was escorted out the back door into a cold, wet Chicago alley, a sobbing, incoherent wreck. The professional fallout was just as swift and surgical. At 7 a.m. the next morning, Jeanette Price walked into the Apex Designs lobby. The office, usually humming by that time, was a tomb. Employees stood by their cubicles, unsure whether to sit, to work, or to flee. Jeanette called an all-hands meeting in the atrium. She stood on the central staircase, wearing the same power suit from the night before. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying without a microphone. "Last night was a new beginning. My first act is one of transparency." She held up the audit report. "This document," she said, "details the lies, waste, and fraud perpetrated by Mr. Roth. It also details the brave work of those who tried to stop him." She looked into the crowd and found a pale, terrified-looking Philip. "Philip," she called out, "please come up here." He looked as if he were being summoned for his own execution. He walked up the stairs, his legs shaking. "Philip," Jeanette said, "is the only person who filed accurate risk reports on the Crescendo project. He is the only person who had the integrity to tell the truth, even when he was ordered to bury it. Because of that, I am promoting him to Senior Vice President, and he will be heading a new, internal integrity task force. His first job is to finish the audit." A different kind of shockwave went through the room. It wasn't fear. It was relief and respect. Jeanette's next move was to fly to New York. She didn't send a lawyer. She went herself. She sat down in the North Star Holdings boardroom, placed the audit on the table and said, "Gentlemen, my predecessor committed fraud. Here is the proof. Here is his termination notice. And here is my personal check for the funds he embezzled." They were stunned. For an hour, she didn't make excuses. She answered every question with brutal honesty. By the end of the meeting, the North Star CEO, who was ready to bankrupt her company, tore up the lawsuit. "Ms. Price," he said, "I've been in this business for 40 years. You're the first person from Apex I've ever trusted. Forget the old project. Let's talk about a new one." 3 months later, they signed a new, larger contract. It was the beginning of her legend. Sawyer, meanwhile, was learning the true meaning of the word fallout. He was unemployable. The word Roth became a verb in Chicago finance. Don't pull a Roth. He was a pariah. He lost the penthouse. The bank repossessed the car. His legal fees, as Apex pursued a civil suit to reclaim the embezzled funds, bankrupted him. 6 months after the gala, Philip was walking out of the Apex Tower. He was now a respected senior executive, on his way to a lunch meeting at a restaurant he once couldn't afford. A courier in an ill-fitting polo shirt, his face gaunt and aged, his hair thinning, rushed past him, carrying a package. The courier stopped, recognizing him. Their eyes met. It was Sawyer. Philip saw not a rival, but a hollowed-out shell. Sawyer's eyes, once so full of arrogance and fire, were now just haunted. He couldn't hold the gaze. He looked down at the pavement, his face burning with a shame so profound it was painful to watch. He clutched his package and scurried away, disappearing into the lunchtime crowd. Jeanette Price, on the other hand, flourished. She rebuilt Apex from the ground up, not with flash, but with steel. She was featured in Crane's Chicago Business for the fastest corporate turnaround of the decade. She was tough, she was fair, and she was brilliant. She never saw Sawyer again. She never had to. She had already given him his life sentence. He hadn't just lost his job or his fiancée. He had lost his past, his present, and his future, all in a single night. He was forced to live every single day with the agonizing, all-consuming regret that the woman he threw away for being too small was, in fact, the biggest person he had ever known. He wasn't an idiot because he left her. He was an idiot because he thought she was worthless. But she was never worthless. He just couldn't recognize value. And so, Sawyer's world collapsed, not from a single mistake, but from a deep-seated arrogance. He tried to humiliate the one person who held his entire life in her hands, and his regret is a prison of his own making. Jeanette proved that true power isn't about the noise you make or the spotlight you crave. It's about the quiet integrity you build when no one is watching. What did you think of Sawyer's karmic downfall? Was it justified? What would you have done if you were in Jeanette's shoes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories about justice, drama, and seeing arrogance get what it deserves, then you're in the right place. Please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see this, and most importantly, click subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.